Okay, let's talk about the society and inequalities of India. And we'll specifically look at the class and caste system in India. It's kind of complicated. Okay, so we're going to start with the caste as Varna. Okay, so caste, the word comes from the Portuguese word meaning race or purity of blood. And it may have evolved from an encounter between the Aryans, who are light-skinned, and the natives, who are dark-skinned. And it certainly grew from interaction of these culturally diverse peoples, which you've learned in the previous chapters how culturally diverse India was. The development of economic and social differences between them is also an underlying factor, and the economic specialization and culture apparently more important through the notions or the ideas of race. Now, it's like I said, the origins of the caste system from the Portuguese casta or race, it is unclear, but like I said, there's this unconventional explanation that points toward the Aryan invasion and then the further subjugation of the indigenous peoples. But the theory's been revised and critiqued by many scholars, and regardless of the origin, by 500 BCE, most Indians saw the caste division of society into 4 orders. And this was timeless. It was the natural consequence of the world, making up the body of the massive god Purusha. And while these theories saw caste as timeless and unchanging, the research indicates moments of fluidity between the social groups in ways that the non-Aryan groups were incorporated into the religious or warrior castes. Okay, so about 500 BCE, there was clear belief that society was divided into 4 great classes, or 4 groups, and that's Varna, okay? And the positions determined by birth. So there is the 3 segments of pure Aryans, or the twice-born. Then we have the Sudras. Those are the native peoples. And they became the various subordinate positions. Now, twice-born. What does this mean? Okay, we have Brahmin, Kshatriya, and Vaishya. That's the twice-born in Aryan. The class of priests, warriors, and commoners that were deemed to be elites that had descended from the Aryan invaders. And as the elites, they were twice-born, once into their bodies and then once into their castes. Now the Shudras and the Untouchables, they were held to be non-Aryan, who worked as servants and laborers for the Aryan caste. And later, another category of people beneath the caste, ranking and occupying the most unclean professions, became known as the Untouchables. And we'll get to that. So the Varna theory. Okay, the 4 groups were formed from the body of the god Purusha, like I said. And this is immutable. Okay. The reality is that it was a considerable social change in ancient India once this took place. There's frequent conflict between the Brahmin and the Kshatriya groups. And they eventually absorbed the tribal peoples within the Aryan groups. And the Vaishya Varna evolved into what became known as the business class. And then, like I said, the Sudras became peasant farmers, and then even the Untouchables eventually below the Shudras. And I put this image in here in hopes that it would help some of you, okay? So you have the Brahmin up at the top, and the Kshatriyas, the Vaishyas, and you'll notice the different spellings, and I get that. The Shudras, the Untouchables, and then eventually the Adivasis at the very bottom. And a pyramid's a great way to look at this too, not just in a level of stairs, but small group of people, little bit larger group of people, little bit larger group of people, and you get the idea. So more people as you go further down the caste. Okay, now let's look at the caste as jati. Okay, there were social distinctions that were based on specific occupations, and these were organized as guilds or jatis. It blended with the Varna system to create the full caste system. So now you have a caste system based on their occupation as well as their race. And like I said, they blended together. Now there were thousands of jatis that became the primary cell of social life. And each of the four great classes were divided into these mini jatis. So here you have the Brahmins, and then you have many jatis within the Brahmins. And then you have the Kshatras, and you have many different jatis within those. So they're kind of like subcastes within these great big caste systems. This is a clearly defined social position. I know you're probably thinking this is not clear to me at all, because it is confusing. But when you're born into this system, it is clearly defined. The marriage and eating together was only permitted within one's individual jati. You couldn't even go outside of your jati, let alone outside your race. Each jati had a particular set of duties and rules and obligations that they lived by. And the ideas of ritual purity and pollution applied to these caste groups. The system was obsessed with the ideas of elite purity and lower caste pollution. The Brahmins were particularly worried about the physical contact with the lower social orders, who cleaned latrines, they handled corpses, they worked with meat, and they were just seen as unclean people. And the elite caste also enjoyed special privileges that were denied to these subordinated populations. And eventually, the inherent inequality was supported by the idea of karma, dharma, and rebirth, which is a large part of Hinduism. The tenets of Hinduism serve to justify, essentially, the social inequality, as one's past actions determines one's status at birth. And as the jatis were hereditary, many understood karma to govern the social inequality, giving it a religious sanction or legitimacy. Likewise, an individual was obligated to follow their path in this life, not just to be a good member of society, but to fulfill their religious obligations in terms of dharma. And this was part of that. So this is how they really used an intricate caste system to justify racism a long time ago in India. So birth into their caste was determined by good or bad deeds. That's the karma, right, of a previous life. And rebirth into a higher caste was determined by your performance of the present day caste, and that's the dharma. Now there's a threat of social ostracism for violating the rules of your jati. If you went outside of your jati, you'd be socially ostracized or isolated, and these individuals couldn't raise their social status. But a whole entire jati can improve their social standing. So not just one individual, but the whole jati or the whole occupation could raise their social standing. So keep calm and let karma finish it, right? All right, let's look at the functions of caste. Okay, the caste was very local, so it focused on loyalties on a restricted territory. Made the empire building very difficult, which you guys learned about in the previous chapter. And caste was almost a substitute for the state and for authority. It's how everything was governed. It provided some social security and support. There was care for widows and orphans and even the destitute or the poor within that jati. And the caste was a means to accommodate migrants and invaders as well, and it made it easier for the wealthy and the powerful to exploit or take advantage of the poor. And so, as Jati membership made one a part of an immediate and self-governing community, there was less of a need for a larger state system to run their society. And the system provided not only an identity, but a mechanism of social support and security for those that were vulnerable or unlucky. And the flexible system allowed for the creation of new jatis for groups that came into Indian society, like those migrants and those invaders. But, like I said, the system allowed the wealthy and the powerful to rationalize the poorly paid labor of the lower social classes. And that is the end of the class and caste system in India.